This week in Texas politics involved a lot of political maneuvering. Let's start our discussion with the headlines from our panel, and we'll begin with political analyst Mark Wiggins. Mark, give me your headline for the week.
The revenge tour off to an 0-1 start.
Connie Sweeney with the Highlander. Connie, give me your headline for the week.
The border crisis and legal battles keep on trucking in the Lone Star State.
Philip Janowski with the Dallas Morning News. Philip, your headline for the week.
Because we got a little old convoy rocking through the night.
This week began with a small victory for Attorney General Ken Paxton, the state Supreme Court issuing a timeout in a long-running whistleblower lawsuit against him, delaying an order to testify under oath, which was followed by a Travis County judge ruling that there will indeed be a trial. Philip, you've been covering this. What's your take on these two different rulings?
You know, this is all starting to feel like a 14-round boxing match between these two folks. It's definitely jabs, counterpunches, etc. between the two legal teams. It seems like anytime somebody seems like they have the upper hand, the other side seems to strike back, and so that's what we really saw. That's what we saw this week with the Supreme Court giving Ken Paxton a victory, and then Travis County judge turning around and handing them a defeat, really in rapid succession.
You know, the delay means that this Paxton fight will probably carry on into the heart of the primary campaigning season. Connie, this game of dodgeball, you know, how's that playing out over there in the Hill Country?
Rudy, what we're seeing, of course, is more delays, but this may be a precursor to what is inevitable. And that's that the AG will be facing his accusers in a court trial. Now, since it's a Super Bowl weekend, I want to use a little bit of an armchair quarterbacking metaphor here. Had he taken care of that $3.3 million settlement out of his own pocket back when he could, he wouldn't be in the position that he's in now.
You know, we've been focused on this whistleblower lawsuit, but there's also another, the securities fraud case, and that is set to start in April. Mark, these two cases could actually be on a collision course, right?
Yeah, Rudy, it just seems more and more like the Attorney General is not going to escape the law, but I'm just not convinced that it's going to have much of an effect on the elections. I mean, voters know who he is by now. The question is, do his supporters still have the numerical advantage in the primary electorate? But, you know, Tuesday's special election really sowed some doubt there.
You know, the deadline to register to vote for the upcoming primaries, that is on Monday the 5th. The hard right, including those who got caught meeting with a Nazi sympathizer, still trying to punish Texas House Republicans who supported the impeachment of Paxton. Former President Trump jumping into the race by endorsing David Covey, who is taking on the Speaker of the House, Dade Phelan, after the Phelan even endorsed Trump. Connie, how's this civil war ramping up in the Hill Country?
Well, Rudy, it appears the state house speaker is not backing down. He has had a lot of the slings and arrows from the more conservative factions of the party, but that hasn't stopped his push to retain his seat. Now, what people are going to be watching is during the primaries, whether he's going to be able to continue his support that he's seen down in his district, as well as maybe capture some of the more moderate Republicans, independents, and then we may even see some Democrats who are willing to cross primary lines, and those numbers could possibly help him to retain his incumbency.
You know, there are some signs that maybe there's some pushback by the moderates. You know, there are a lot of cases that are pushing about against the extremists. Republican Jill Dutton won an East Texas State House special election over a challenger backed by Governor Abbott, Ted Cruz, and Ken Paxton. Democrat Colin Allred, in his fight to win the Democrat Senate nomination, continues to gain support by claiming to be a moderate. Even here in Travis County, a moderate Democrat is taking on a progressive DA. Mark, do you see moderates and independents actually pushing back, or am I just seeing things?
Yeah, I do think there are some hopeful signs that we're seeing sort of the rise of the radical middle. The extremes have become so off the wall that your average person is sick of it. The problem is that in Texas, your average person doesn't vote. And that's how we found ourselves here. So the question is, have things gotten so extreme that it motivates people who don't normally to get off the sidelines and say enough is enough and vote in this upcoming primary election?
Philip, what do you think? Moderate pushback? Are you seeing that?
I don't know if I'm seeing moderate pushback. I mean, when you think about the Jill Dutton Brent Money special election, I mean, what my sort of take on that is that was more about Jill Dutton's ground game. You know, she was out there campaigning very hard. Sure, she got a lot of money to do it, but she was getting endorsements from mayors, city council members, school board members, folks like that, as opposed to Greg Abbott. And I think we're kind of seeing maybe the extent to which what a high profile statewide political leaders actual endorsement has when you come to a local race like that. But as far as moderates go, I don't think that Jill Dutton's a moderate. It's just we're kind of in this weird space that the fact that you're not taking money from an organization connected to a neo-Nazi sympathizer makes you a moderate. Well, yeah, I guess that's just that's just the way things are these days.
Connie, you
I want
agree
to
that
jump
this?
on what Phil is saying, and going back to the allegation that a lot of Democrats were participating in that election. I think you can look at that and you can look at it a couple different ways. My feeling is that's going to be a little bit overblown because when you think about the last major election back in 2020, there was no Republican primary. There was the incumbent president, and then there was a very hotly contested Democratic primary. So, I think you're going to find that there were a lot of people who just voted in the primary where there was action.
So, Connie, you agree? Is it more about the grassroots, the shoe leather campaign, and not necessarily the big endorsements?
That makes sense because anyone would be hard pressed to say that there's a moderate uprising in Texas when you're dealing with like that particular district northeast of the Metroplex. I mean, it's still a super conservative district. So voters there had a choice between redder or reddest, and by a razor thin margin they picked someone who they thought was red. Of course, she's a conservative. And so when you're looking at some of these races, it might appear that some of the conservatives still can't stomach a more scorched earth approach to politics. And so you're going to see them watching to see who has the best ground game.
The Biden administration this week seemed to be trying to punish Texas, refusing to back down on the border, pausing the approval of liquefied natural gas exports. Meanwhile, a back the border caravan of Abbott supporters holding a rally in Dripping Springs while heading to South Texas. The standoff certainly ramping up this week. Philip, someone's got to blink, right?
No, no one has to blink. This whole sort of thing is just a lot of shouting into the void, and it all means nothing because at the end of the day, the Supreme Court said that Border Patrol can go in and cut some wires, and the Texas National Guard can go and lay some wires. It doesn't change a single thing. But I do have to give huge props to Governor Greg Abbott's PR folks for making him basically the most popular GOP governor. Boy, I bet he wishes he was getting this kind of press 2 years ago. But man, I mean, like it is just it's dominating the headlines, but it's there's really nothing there.
Shouting into the void from the hill country, Connie?
Well, the back of the border convoy, and I think it's probably raising support from about 3 different states. We got to see kind of how colorful it would be with their stop in Dripping Springs and what it might look like once it gets down to the border. It appears that the origins of it were based in some truckers who wanted to have sort of a spiritual tent revival gathering down in the border. There's going to be lots of prayers. There's going to be folks holding signs and showing support for Governor Abbott, and then some of the law enforcement that's down there trying to secure the border. So anyone who's looking for some sort of standoff among this convoy, they will be disappointed.
Yeah, it looked more like a party. It looked more like a party than a protest.
Right, but I agree with you, Philip. I think it's a tremendous PR spin. You agree, Mark?
You have to ask what the end game is. Border politics in Texas has always carried an element of theater, but the border is becoming a tinderbox of armed factions that are very angry. And it's happening at the same time. You've got the ex-president trying to scuttle a deal in Congress that could really address all of these problems. So, it kind of feels like that scene in Billy Madison where the O'Doyle family car goes careening off the cliff with everybody shouting, "O'Doyle rules!"
Oil rules. Sorry.
No, it does seem very surreal and a little frightening too, right? Well, Four Texas congressmen on the House Homeland Security Committee helped push through impeachment articles against the Secretary of Homeland Security. A member of the President cabinet has not been impeached in 150 years. And while I think that it was a safe vote for Representatives McCall, Gonzalez, Pfluger, and Luttrell, this probably will be the closest a case of impeachment ever reaches the president's desk. Guys, y'all agree with that? Mark, I'll start with you.
Well, the House GOP only has 2 votes to spare. Ken Buck has already said he's going to be a no. So now it's just a 1 vote margin. So watching how, the Speaker Johnson tries to wrangle his caucus on this is going to be must-see TV for us political nerds.
Philip, you agree?
I'm not following that as closely, but the one thing that I will say is that for better or worse, it feels like impeachment has become a lot more normalized, and it's just possibly a bit more of a tool in the toolbox, as a lot of politicians like to say, just to gin up outrage and create headlines. And I was reading something yesterday that basically I thought the author was pretty on point, where they basically said, this is not you're impeaching somebody for doing a bad job. I mean, that's not really what the tool is for. But as I said, that's kind of normalized these days.
Right, kind of redefining everything. What do you think, Connie?
Well, the most conservative side of the Republican Party wants blood, and it looks like that Mayorkas, they're trying to make a sacrificial lamb, and it may end up just being symbolic. It likens back to about 2013 when you had the issue with Eric Holder, the AG in Fast and Furious. I mean, he was found in contempt of Congress, and it almost seemed like it was more of a buffer between him and President Obama at the time, and that may be Mayorkas's position right now.
All right, let's wrap up this week in Texas politics with one word, and we'll start with Philip. Give me your word, Philip.
My word is shout out. I want to shout out my colleague Robert Garrett, who retired yesterday after a legendary career covering Texas politics. He's a mentor, a friend, and will be greatly missed in our office and at the Texas Capitol. Truly, congratulations, Bob.
For sure on that one. Connie, what's your word?
Well, because of the spinning wheels on the convoy and the never-ending legal battles for the AG, my word is spinning.
Mark, your word.
Revenge, spelled with a U and a question mark.
And with that, we're wrapping up another week in Texas politics.